was there something else that influenced you to then take on that role?
Sharp intake of breath. Let's talk about the role. The role is the Queen's representative.
Yes, yes.
So the Queen has two representatives. The senior one is called the Lord Lieutenant, and that post lasts until the occupant of the post reaches the age of 75. The High Sheriff is the second of the two appointments of the Queen, and that is an annual appointment, and it's been so ever since about 1260 something, when King John decided, well, the people decided actually, King John and his rule were so corrupt that they just couldn't have it that way anymore, and something called the Magna Carta came out. Yes. And so when the Magna Carta was issued, the High Sheriff could only be High Sheriff for a year, because the role of the High Sheriff was to collect the taxes. So they had to know everybody.
I've just got Robin Hood in my head.
And that's the same time. That's the same time. King John, Robin Hood, very corrupt. The sheriff was a very bad man. He was a very bad man. Collect the taxes. He knew who had children, and therefore the male ones would form the army. He dispensed the justice and could do everything from cutting off heads to whatever he chose to do in lesser forms of capital punishment. So the High Sheriff was a very powerful, powerful animal. It's only in about the 1800s that the Lord Lieutenants came in. I think that's about right. I said earlier, I'm not a historian, so you'll have to check the dates. It's not something that you ever aspire to, really. I mean, you don't go out and you don't set out to become the High Sheriff or the Lord Lieutenant. Those are things that just kind of happen. Why me? I don't know. I mentioned that I worked for the Prince of Wales for business in the community for 17 years, during which time I worked with businesses, I worked in communities. I tried very hard to breach some of the gaps between. I looked at education issues, homelessness, business, the boardroom issues, diversity, everything that you can imagine that is, it's not necessarily how to run a business, but guess what? If you get those things wrong, your business doesn't work very well. Healthy high streets need healthy back streets, is what we said. So that kind of work kept me visible. I was visible. I mentioned the Japanese ambassador and all of the work in economic development. I was visible. I was a safe pair of hands. All of the years that I had been a governor in the city of Bristol College or the University of the West of England, or been on the board of HTV as it was in those days, and then changed into YTV, West Wales, or the stuff with GWR when we got the franchise to run the radio station here in the early days. You know, my hands, I was visible, and thank goodness I hadn't blotted my copy book by that time. I was nominated in the year 2007 to become High Sheriff. 2007 is an important year because it was the abolition of slavery, the anniversary, the 200th anniversary of the abolition of slavery. So 1807 to 2007. And I can only imagine that somebody said, do you realize in 200 years we still have had a black president in England doing this job? And it just was, I happened to be the right age, I happened to be in the right place at the right time, and somebody tapped me on the shoulder, the current High Sheriff, whom I knew, whom I was very interested in talking to about business and the community matters, rang up and said, let's have lunch one day. So I said, great, because I thought business in the community, I finally got in the door, be able to do some interesting stuff here. And he said, you know, he was minded to nominate me as High Sheriff of Bristol. So, wow, that was just something that I didn't expect.
And how was that year for you? The year that you were high sheriff.
It was great fun. It was very demanding.
Yeah.
What most people don't realize is it's a totally voluntary role. It's a role where you have to cover an enormous number of costs. So it's not an inexpensive thing to do. It is extremely worthwhile. It's that role where you congratulate people for doing good things.
Yeah,
you know,
which is always a good feeling.
It is wonderful.
Yeah.
So it's the youth club organizers. It's the people that do the most ordinary things that we rely on to have a safe and integrated community. It's going into the faith groups. It's working alongside the police, because again, the sheriff still has that responsibility. It's getting to know the judges and seeing what happens in our justice system. It is an amazing privilege. It is very, very time consuming. There were weeks when I did between 3 and 8 engagements, and that means that you've got to manage the emails coming in, you've got to send the thank you notes, you've got to do this, that, and the other. Traditionally in Bristol we have a concert, and I was fortunate enough to get Sir Willard White to sing with his deep, profundo bass voice in Bristol Cathedral, which was absolutely wonderful. You know, the cathedral was absolutely packed. So it's just things that you wouldn't do. You raise money, so I guess on average the High Sheriff raises about £1,000 a week, and that money goes toward providing activities for young people that wouldn't get that sort of provision. So it's normally in disadvantaged communities, either in the centre of town or the outer estates, or places where they couldn't get funding from Bristol City Council's youth funding at that time. So you're helping young kids. I mean, what's not to like that? It's great fun. Get to dress up in silly clothes.